Elias sat at the small kitchen table, the wood scarred by years of dinners. But tonight it held only the weight of failure. A mountain of medical bills, tinted with the aggressive red of past due notices, seemed to pulsate under the flickering light. Beside them lay the eviction notice, a cold legal declaration that his childhood home was finally slipping away. Every breath felt heavy, thick with the scent of cheap disinfectant and the rot of poverty. In the next room, a thin, hollow cough broke the silence. It was Maya. Each sound ripped through Elias like a physical blow. His 7-year-old daughter was fading, her laughter replaced by a wheeze that medical science could fix, but only if one had the currency to buy life. Elias felt like a ghost in his own home, working 3 jobs and still unable to afford the stale air his daughter needed. He looked at his calloused hands and felt the crushing realization that effort was no longer enough. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The doorbell rang at precisely midnight, a sharp, intrusive sound that did not belong in their neighborhood. On the porch sat a single, sleek envelope. It was obsidian black, the paper heavy like stone. There was no return address, only a gold-embossed time and coordinates for a high-rise in the city's financial district. The words, "A life-changing opportunity," were written in a clinical script. Elias knew he should be afraid, but desperation had long ago strangled his fear. He had nothing left to lose except the people he loved, and he was already losing them to the slow decay of debt. The next morning, the glass monolith of the high-rise felt like another world. Elias, in his best but frayed suit, was ushered into an office that smelled of expensive leather and silence. Behind a desk of polished obsidian sat the arbiter. Her eyes were like shards of winter ice, and her presence was as calculated as a mathematical equation. Without a word, she slid a heavy leather suitcase across the desk. When it clicked open, the sight was blinding. $500,000 in crisp sequential bills. It was more money than Elias would see in 10 lifetimes. It was Maya's surgery. It was Sarah's security. It was the end of the red notices. "There is a condition," the arbiter said, her voice devoid of empathy. The terms were simple and absolute. Elias could take the money, and every debt would vanish, every medical bill would be paid, and his family would never want for anything again. But the price was his existence. He had to vanish immediately. No goodbyes, no letters, no secret visits. He would be relocated, given a new identity, and forbidden from ever contacting Sarah or Maya again. If he even looked in their direction, the wealth would be stripped away. It was a total erasure of his soul in exchange for their survival. That evening, Elias returned home for his final hour. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of Maya's chest. She looked so fragile, a doll broken by a world that did not care. Sarah lay beside her, her face lined with the exhaustion of 1,000 nights. He wanted to scream, to wake them and hold them. But he remained a shadow. He realized the money ensures their future, but erases his presence. To stay was to watch them suffer. To leave was to save them. The silence of the house felt like a tomb as he walked to the table and signed the contract. A black sedan was waiting at the curb. As Elias stepped inside, the door closed with a pressurized thud. He did not look back. He could not. His phone vibrated, a notification confirming the deposit of $500,000. But as he watched, the screen began to flicker. A remote command was erasing every byte of data. One by one, the photos of Maya's first steps and Sarah's smile dissolved into white light. By the time the car reached the highway, the phone was factory reset. Elias stared at his reflection in the dark glass, a man with a fortune and not a single memory left to hold. The hook was set. Geneva was a landscape of glass and cold precision, far from the town Elias had fled. His new identity, David Miller, came with a penthouse that overlooked the lake. For the first few months, Elias lived in a state of suspended animation. He had everything: tailored suits and a kitchen stocked with food. Yet, he spent his nights on the floor, the luxury of the mattress feeling like an insult to the memory of the cramped, warm bed he had shared with Sarah. The silence of the apartment was a living thing, a heavy pressure that made his ears ring. He lived in a world of gold, starving for the sound of a child's laughter. He soon learned that his freedom was an illusion. The apartment was a cage, wired with sensors that monitored his every move. The organization, led by the invisible hand of the arbiter, didn't just want his absence. They wanted his absolute obedience. He saw the subtle signs of their presence everywhere, the way the security guard at the lobby nodded with a knowing glint, or the way his bank statements were delivered with clinical timing. One evening, he attempted to mail a blank letter to Sarah. Before he could reach the mailbox, a black car pulled alongside him. The window rolled down just an inch, and a cold voice reminded him that any contact was a breach, and a breach meant the forfeiture of his family's lives. Driven by a desperation that even wealth couldn't dull, Elias began to use his resources to fight back. He didn't seek a way out. He sought a way to see in. Through a series of untraceable transactions, he hired a private investigator. The first reports were a lifeline. He saw photos of Maya, her hair longer, her face vibrant with health. The surgery had been a success. Sarah was working again, her eyes tired, but no longer haunted by the specter of debt. They were safe. The $500, zeros or dollars had done its job, but the relief was short-lived. As the years passed, the updates became a source of agonizing pain. He saw the bitter truth written in his wife's face. She wasn't just mourning, she was hardening. Through intercepted emails, Elias learned the narrative the organization had carefully cultivated. To his family, Elias hadn't made a sacrifice. He had simply left. The rumor was that he had gambled away their savings and fled to escape the consequences. He watched from across an ocean as Maya grew up resentful, her childhood innocence replaced by a sharp anger. She blamed him for every holiday spent in silence. To his daughter, he wasn't the man who saved her. He was the coward who abandoned her. Wealth became a prison. Elias realized that the $500 was the price the organization used to purchase his soul for a grand social experiment. They were studying the breaking point of human connection. Every expensive bottle of wine he opened felt like a betrayal. He was a participant in a twisted game where the stakes were the very essence of his humanity. 5 years into his exile, a photo arrived that changed everything. It was Maya's graduation. She was beautiful in her cap and gown, but she held a framed picture of Elias with a gaze so full of devastation that it felt like a physical strike. That same night, Elias cracked the organization's internal surveillance. He discovered that the arbiter had been actively manipulating his family's lives, feeding Maya's hatred to keep them dependent on the mystery funds. The final revelation turned his blood to ice. Maya was turning 18, and the organization was already preparing her file. They were planning to recruit her, using a fabricated crisis to offer her the same choice he had made. They wanted to turn his daughter into the next ghost. Elias looked at the cameras in his ceiling and knew the contract had to die. He would burn his world to save her. The wealth that had been his cage finally became his crowbar. Elias spent months mapping the digital architecture of his luxury prison, using his vast resources to coordinate with his private investigator. On a night thick with the fog of Lake Geneva, Elias executed a ghost protocol. He triggered microsurges that blinded the biometric cameras for exactly 90 seconds. In that window, he vanished, leaving a looped recording of a sleeping man. He moved through the shadows of Europe and across the Atlantic, traveling as a faceless laborer. By the time the organization realized the penthouse was a tomb, Elias was breathing the familiar salt-heavy air of his hometown. A man with a fortune in his pocket and fire in his heart. He did not return to his old house. Instead, he sought the source of the rot. He tracked the arbiter to a satellite office that hummed with clinical indifference. When he stepped into her office, he was not the broken father she remembered. He was a predator who had learned the game. He dropped encrypted drives onto her desk, evidence of the organization's illicit human experimentation and the systematic destruction of families. He had spent his 5 years documenting every breach of law they had committed. He told her that if he was killed, or if Maya was ever approached, The servers of every major news outlet would ignite with the truth. The arbiter's composure, usually as cold as liquid nitrogen, finally shattered. She did not offer money. She knew it was a worthless currency now. They struck a final, desperate bargain. The organization would purge the surveillance, void the contracts, and ensure Sarah and Maya were never touched again. But the price was his complete erasure. Elias had to surrender his remaining millions and live as a penniless ghost in the city where his family breathed. He could never speak to them, never touch them, and never reveal he was the one who saved them. He signed the final document with a steady hand, trading his life for their peace. 3 days later, the sun hung low over the local park, casting long golden shadows across the playground. Elias sat on a rusted bench, his clothes frayed, and his face hidden beneath a worn cap. He looked like any other man defeated by the tides of life. He saw them approaching. Maya, now a woman with eyes full of intelligence, and Sarah, whose face had regained a softness he had not seen in years. They sat on a bench just 10 feet away, sharing a small bag of fruit. Elias felt the urge to stand up, to shout their names until his lungs burned, but he remained a statue. Silence was the only shield he had left to offer them. As they rose to leave, Elias walked past them, moving with the anonymity of a shadow. He did not look back, but as he passed their bench, he subtly placed a small, weathered object on the wood. It was a handmade wooden bird, its wings chipped from years of being carried in his pocket. It was the only piece of his old life he had kept. From the safety of a nearby tree, he watched Maya stop. She turned back, her eyes catching the familiar shape. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the carving she had loved as a toddler. He saw the sudden, sharp intake of breath as the realization hit them. They scanned the park, their eyes desperate and wet with tears. They did not find him, but they found the truth. They understood he had not left because of greed. He was still there, a guardian in the dark. Elias walked away into the cold evening, his stomach empty. He was a man with nothing left but his clothes, yet as he watched his family walk home under his protection, he realized that the money had been the cheapest thing he ever owned. The truth was worth everything he had given up.